So, welcome to AI for wealth management. This was adopted from a talk we gave at our user forum in Texas this year, and we got great feedback on it. Lots of fantastic dialogue. I hope to replicate some of that here um, about AI. What is it? Um, and learn a little bit about what it really is. Also, why is it happening now? Right. So, what is it that changed in the last few months to a year to make AI really happen in a way that entered all of our consciousness? How can you use it in your practice? Right. Well, we're gonna actually show you some examples. We're going to go live with one of the AI providers, and we're going to generate something. We're going to create something together as a group. We're going to talk about its limits. So what can't it do? And there's a lot, right? It's not all knowing. And how do you stay safe and secure and private using it? Privacy and security is a concern for everyone as it should be. So we're going to address that as we go. And Justin, I see a little question there. Is that something we should answer now, or you, my friend, are muted?
Okay, someone wants to know why I don't have a blue shirt on. Um, I usually wear white. I know. On video,
Oh,
white shirts. In person, I typically gravitate towards blue. Thanks, Tim.
thank you for the branding police. We appreciate that, and I do love the color blue. You can tell, and you can see that we're actually in on this side. We're in the Blue Leaf studio, so this is where we do our podcast that we do every month, the Augmented Advisor. So thank you for that. There. All right. So let's start with um, what is AI? Um, you know, there's a lot of ideas about AI. The movies have done us, no great service here. I mean, is AI this, or is it this? Let's see. Anyone? Anyone? Or is it this? Right, your friendly little robot that chatters or chirps at you or tells you you're wrong or right. Really, it's none of those things. There's a little more mundane definition for artificial intelligence. So the base definition is the science and engineering of making intelligent machines. It's a little vague, but importantly, it leaves open the question: what is intelligence? So that's something that philosophers have spent a lot of time over the millennia answering. But from a computing perspective, really the person that you want to pay attention to is Alan Turing. Uh, Alan broke codes in World War II. The movie The Imitation Game was about his life and that project for code breaking, the Enigma machine, it was called. He designed one of the first stored program computers, so a computer that could remember its programming and all. And in the 50s, he turned his attention to artificial intelligence. That's a long time ago. And he proposed a test to determine intelligence. It's so famous, it's actually called the Turing test. And the idea was to have a human interrogate or have a dialogue with a machine. And if they could distinguish that they're speaking with a machine versus a human, then it failed. And all the test was needed to do was to convince you that you were talking to a human. Given what we'll discuss today, I think we have to be a little skeptical about that definition. It was in the 50s, and it was a little naive. I think we're going to find that we're going to have to redefine intelligence. But most AI up to now was different. Most AI, say prior to November 2022, was used to analyze, classify, optimize, make a recommendation. It focused on finding a pattern in the data and then offering that pattern as an insight or a guide for that data. So AI was, things like what drives your Facebook or LinkedIn recommendations. That's a classifier that's doing that. What does Amazon use to tell you what else you should buy with the thing that you've got? So that was mainly what it was used for and what was going on. So now it's a little different. And we're going to talk about something called generative AI. That is the thing that's newish, and it really is different. Generative AI is AI that can autonomously create or generate new content. So this AI is much better at understanding patterns and relationships and data, and then using those patterns and relationships in a way that can produce or synthesize new information. In short, it can create, um, not exactly out of thin air. It needs some basic building blocks. And those building blocks are why it's happening now. Um, there are three basic building blocks of generative AI that have all recently grown past a tipping point. Um, and the first one is this unprecedented scale of data. So it's essentially the entire internet. And when you think about that, you got to think broadly. So, yeah, this is language, like all languages, which are all over the internet, but this is also code. So, computer languages, images, right? That's data and information, sounds, so audio files, anything digital. The scale of that data and the availability of it, and the access to it is really unprecedented. The second thing is unimaginably vast amounts of computing power in the cloud. So cloud computing and access to that vast amount of computing power makes it possible then to attempt to analyze that data, to wrangle it, to manage it, to work with it. And then the third thing that takes advantage of both of those are new architectures. So these are architectures for deep learning that can take advantage of all of that data and computing power. New things called transformers and diffusion architectures that create these distant connections in data. Those distant connections are something called long range dependencies. And those are really, really critical. That was the last breakthrough. When you've got trillions of data points, you need something that can figure out a connection between 0.1 and 0.2 trillion, right? So that really changed. And so this idea of the transformer and what it means comes up when we start to think about these new things that we're seeing. So GPT, that's the underlying model of ChatGPT. That's what all the fuss was about most recently in the last few months. And what that means is GPT, generative pre-trained transformer. So transformer, that's the model. That was the model we were just talking about. Pre-trained, well, that's obvious. And generative is this idea that it can create, right? These are also called or referred to as large language models or LLMs. You'll see that around. And you can kind of see this progress was very fast and sort of sudden when you look at the different models for GPT. 2019, it was dealing with 1.5 billion parameters. Sounds like a lot. 2021, 175 billion parameters. And there was this mid model where they didn't release parameters, but you can imagine it somewhere between 3 and 4. And that's where we felt all this progress around November 2022. And GPT-4, which is out now, has several trillion parameters. So that's that growth in data availability, computing scale, and these models that then could create these incredibly powerful large language models, this generative AI. And what can generative AI do? Well, it can write, um, and um, it can do so in incredibly interesting ways. This is one of my favorite examples of writing, which is silly, but it goes to a lot of its capabilities. I can ask it to write instructions on making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in the style of the King James Bible. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but it does things that are just as silly as the request. It talks about joining the slices of bread in holy matrimony and really silly things like that. But there's lots of practical applications to what it can write, which is virtually anything. It can also write things like computer code. This is an example of something I created using ChatGPT. It was a Chrome plugin. So these things that you add to your web browser. And to be clear, I haven't written code for a living in a long time. Wouldn't have known how to write a Chrome browser if you held a gun to my head. And within 30 minutes, I had a working Chrome plugin because of all of this that it had taken in, and what I was able to ask it to do. Uh, the other thing it can do is it can create images. So again, literally from thin air, from a text description, it can create an image like this. What you're seeing here was created by one of the image software that is available and run on one of these generative AI models. So it can do some incredible things. That's why it's so transformative. That's why it feels so in our face over the last few months. It doesn't need specific training to be able to do something. That's one of the wild things that people realized. So, as for instance, ChatGPT, as an example, was never trained to do language translation, but because it understood and was trained on multiple languages, it's relatively easy for it to then interpret how to do a translation. I used it to translate um, some things into Vietnamese, which I clearly don't speak, and had no clue. And the native Vietnamese speaker who I sent it to said it was really good. It was colloquial, it was natural, etc. So it can do some incredible things without actually having been trained to do those specific things. It can do things and create from very little input. That image that was created was just created from a couple of lines of instruction. And the other thing, and this is the thing that has freaked people out a little bit, is it feels very close to human. There's lots of funny stories about folks exploring this new model and this new technology, where AI tried to, tell a New York Times writer that the New York Times writer was in love with it. It did a whole bunch of things. The thing to understand about what's happening under the hood, what is these models really doing, is, and I'm going to go back to another slide here. Every word, every character is just the result of a probability calculation based on the training set that it's got, and based on the prompt you give it. And so all the system is doing is saying, okay, what's the most probable next character? What's the most probable next character or next word, et cetera. And if you look at some of the developer models, which we have access to, as you might imagine, you can see the probabilities quite explicitly. Um, it still can feel really spooky when you ask it a question. It can feel very real, which is why I said earlier that we have to revisit this Turing test a little bit, because it is clearly not intelligent in the way that we would intuitively understand intelligence, um, but it is quite powerful and quite amazing and transformative. So, okay, how do you actually use this stuff? Many of you may have started to use this. So the first thing that you have to do is you have to find an application. So this, not comprehensive but pretty extensive list are a variety of the AI or generative AI based applications in different areas. So there's all those that are there to generate text or create images or do video or audio editing, or to do coding, or to analyze data. There's a million different ways to use it. As a for instance, we have a new AI based tool in our podcast production that does automatic editing of the podcast on the video. So it'll take the video and make cuts based on who's speaking and do a variety of other things that are designed to sort of accelerate a human task. That doesn't feel um, as maybe amazing as when it sounds like a human when it's speaking to you, but all of this wasn't possible before generative AI. So when you're thinking about using it, there's a lot of applications and unfortunately, there's also a lot of applications that are just slapping the AI label on them, and maybe aren't really AI. But let's talk about the sort of the really big three that you should be aware of. So, ChatGPT, most of you have heard of. Um, this is text or chat generation. It's by a company called OpenAI. It is also used as part of Microsoft's Bing and Edge offering, which combines the generative AI with search and makes it quite powerful. One example was, excuse me, the same reporter who got the model to fall in love with him, which was very strange, also was able to say, do a search within Bing, the AI powered Bing, to get a suggestion for a dinner, then come up with the ingredient list, and then come up with a shopping list organized by aisle for his favorite grocery store. So really interesting things that you can do and really practical acceleration of day-to-day tasks. Bard is Google's model, so it's very similar, though it's maybe a little less mature. And the big one that you hear about again from OpenAI, DAL-E, is their image generation. So this is where you can enter a text prompt and get it to create an image for you. Um, so how these things work if you haven't used them, well, you set up an account in your favorite tool. So ChatGPT is which is what we're going to do here in just a moment. And then you prompt the system by asking it to do something. You see my prompt here at the top of the screen. The better your prompt, the better your result, and that leads to something that's now known as prompt engineering. So, prompt engineering is, a fancy way of saying the more you tweak and improve your prompt, the better result you get. And there are lots of little tricks and tips that you get to learn over time in engineering prompts. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that. It's a deep rabbit hole for for incremental improvement, but we are going to do some prompting and actually create some stuff here. So, what can you do in your practice? There's I mean, it's pretty limitless, but it can write an email if you want to write an email to a client for any scenario you might imagine, a little more formal, maybe something longer that you want it to take a crack at. It can write a blog post for you about any topic that you want, or create an outline, which is a frequent use that we see. Outline what you're going to write, and then we fill in the blanks and do the writing. So we use that quite a lot. It can draft templates of key documents,
We,
like
we used this a couple of weeks ago. Sorry, John, to interrupt.
yeah, no worries.
When we were down at the customer forum down in Dallas, one of the hot topics was what what's going to happen if we default on the debt ceiling. And so we just casually typed in, please explain the debt ceiling to me as if I were in fifth grade. And it spit out like 3 or 4 paragraphs that really broke down what the debt ceiling was. So that's something you could pass along to your clients that are asking, should I be freaked out about this? What is this thing that everyone's talking about on CNN or Fox News or wherever you get your information from? And it just took a really, I don't say complex, but what can feel like a very complex topic and really just break it down for you in a very simplistic way.
Do you want to show them, Justin? Why don't you share your screen and we'll jump in here.
Sure. And there are a number of other applications that we can jump into, and I am going to share my screen. Okay, so this is ChatGPT, And I signed in here. You can do any number of things. Please, I try to be polite. It's a machine, but it's an intelligent machine, so it knows when you're being rude. Um, let's explain the US debt ceiling. If I can spell. You don't even have to spell correctly, but it helps. Ceiling um, in 4 paragraphs to a fifth grader. And I always use fifth grade because they had that TV show, Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? Um, so this is just something that it's just going to break down in words that you and all of your clients can understand and explain something complex like that. So when you have a real world event that your clients are going to talk about and ask about, even if they don't ask about it, they will ask you about it. They're probably asking their friends and colleagues about it. They're wondering if it has to do with the economy or the stock market or money in general. Really to understand if that's something they have to be concerned about or really understand what it is so they can determine whether they should be concerned about it. Um, but this is just, I'm just going to leave that up there for a second. Just graze through it. You can sign up for your own ChatGPT and do this. You can also refine this if this doesn't explain it quite the way you want, or you get exactly what you want. You go down here and you can refine it and say either regenerate the message, or you can further define it and say,
Let's do it in one paragraph. Can you reduce this to one paragraph? And we can scroll down to watch it happen. Now, sometimes the model can take a little bit while it's thinking, or because there's a lot of traffic on the model. Um, but more often than not, it'll come back within a few seconds and do exactly what you asked it to. Um, Kind of like a junior staffer would. Um, and the interesting thing here, and people often ask me when we're talking about it, well, is this plagiarizing something? Not exactly. No. What it's doing is, again, each of those words are generated probabilistically based on what it was trained. Now, there are some sentences that are similar, um, and you might find versions that are quite close, but none of them will be exactly the same because it really is just a probability engine. It doesn't copy and paste. It just creates the most probable answer based on your prompt and all of its training data.
mhm. So this just broke the 4 paragraphs from before into one paragraph here. Everybody can take a second and read that. It's really just simple. Now, it does a lot more than that. And we kind of freaked out one of our customers when we were in Dallas because I started a new chat, which is if you just want to, you can keep going on the debt ceiling and you can keep refining that just by going down and send a message or regenerate. But if you want to start a totally new idea, a new thought, you just go up here, hit create new chat. And I said, please create a investment policy statement for an RIA based in Alaska who only focuses in DFA funds. How much did you spend the last time you wrote an investment policy statement on the attorney reviewing this? And how much time did you spend writing your investment policy statement?
And that's just your first draft. So of course you'd review every line of this, and of course you'd tailor and adjust, et cetera. But the amazing power here really is it can get you started, get you very close to what you want. And as you can see, very quickly. Um, Even while it was happening and we weren't speaking, it didn't seem like that long because it wasn't. It was less than 10 seconds it took to create a template of an investment policy statement. And you can tweak any of those parameters that you gave it. If you think about that prompt as parameters, you could change it so that it's for somebody in Tennessee as an RIA, or somebody that just uses standard ETFs, or someone that entirely focuses on retirees and decumulation phase. You can adjust it, and it knows what those things mean, and it will interpret that and update the statement based on that. Um,
John talked about prompt engineering earlier. I've taken no courses in prompt engineering, so I just sort of write whatever pops in my head, and then I go, "That's not quite right," and I edit it and ask him to do it again politely. And I get kind of similar results. It just takes me 4 or 5, follow-up prompts to get to where John gets in one. Um, just because I haven't taken the class and structured it a little bit better. Now, because it's intelligent, it's going to get better for me faster. So I can either learn the engineering and become better faster, or I can wait for the technology to catch up. Um, there's all sorts of things that you can do here. John mentioned Dolly earlier, which is for image generation. How much did you spend on your last logo design? You know, yeah, it was probably about a $200 to $500 if you use something like 99 Designs, or one of those folks. If you did someone local, it was probably closer to 3 or 4 thousand dollars. And you can do the same thing we just did here. You just do it in Dali, and it's going to come up with the logo, make it rustic, make it, whatever Art Deco, if you want it to be Art Deco, make it appropriate for Utah, or Kentucky Strong, like whatever it is. You can explain what you want for your logo, and then go, that's okay. Make it better. Do it again. Make it more this. And you can really do all that stuff we used to have to hire out, which is one of the things that's making musicians and artists really nervous, is because now non-creative people like me can get creative. I just have to tell it what to do.
Yeah, it will actually, there are services that will actually generate music. Um, so essentially anything digital can be created on the fly based only on a text prompt. Some of the image generation software will also intake an image and then make adjustments based on that. So if you have an existing logo, you could upload it and ask it to adjust or change or modernize, or based on language, you can give it instructions. Um, so there's a tremendous amount of possibility here. Um, so while we're here, I don't see a lot of questions or Q&A. Um, so
In addition to the, so keep going, John, but I'm just, in terms of thought, but when we had a product we developed about 6 or 7 years ago called Wealth Guard, and when we were trying to come up with a logo for it, John had his ideas, I had mine. Neither one of them were very good, so we hired a professional logo maker. And actually, I think we hired 5 different logo makers on 99 Designs, and in order to see who was going to win that contest. And we kept having to go back and say, do it more this, do it this. And it was a day or two after we'd ask for a revision to get it back. Now I get that revision back in about 2 to 3 seconds. And it's probably closer to what we're actually asking, because it just sort of understands my language better than, somebody in Costa Rica who's sitting on a beach and trying to interpret what I'm saying.
right now, that isn't to say that technology is a panacea or that it totally replaces the need for humans. Often, what we've found is that it is a great way to get started, whether it's generating a draft, um, or um, a first cut or an outline or something along those lines. And we often find that it is the mix of generative AI and the human that actually creates really wonderful results. Um, so um, so it's pretty amazing. We have a question, um, and it's I'll read it out loud. Someone recently read that people are suing AI companies for using their books or other materials to train the AI tool. Could this become more prevalent due to the depending on the outcome of lawsuits and other implications? Super question. The short answer is yes. It's likely to become a thing that happens a little more frequently, and I think that leads us to um, I think that leads us to some of the limitations that we should expect with AI. So I'm just gonna go ahead and share my screen again and should see limitations. Great. So how far can all this go? So a lot of this depends on the training data. So this is the question that was asked about our the suit and where the data comes from. It's actually as a result of this that Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, believes that the era of large language models, like we're talking about, he didn't say it was coming to a close, but essentially there's not much more headroom. Um, and to just simply improve by consuming more data, and that's because they've consumed most of what's available out on the internet. And this other issue that companies and individuals are beginning to shut down access to data or ask for fees for data use. So this is exactly goes to the issue that was the question. Um, and what's likely to happen in other areas of internet law, this has happened where, if you just put something out there without copyright, et cetera, it's unprotected and it's fair game. But if things have been are out in the public domain, but they're copyrighted, think music, et cetera, then you're likely going to need to pay to use that. So we'll see how that all gets sorted out. But of course, most of this training has already happened. And to be clear, the way that these models work, it's not as if you can go in and scrape out the data that led to the model. Um, it's truly a black box. There are nodes of sort of connective tissue, if you will, probabilities essentially that express the likelihood of A being related to B, et cetera. It's a bunch of linear algebra essentially, and and so when you get data that you'd like to unlearn, there's no clear way to do that or to be able to identify, where that came from. So there's a lot of unknowns here. Um, but it's unlikely to affect, consumers of the technology. It's much more likely to impact the producers of this technology and how they go forward and manage and all of that. So there's a lot coming. I noticed there's a couple of questions, Justin, some things that we should answer here.
Um, technology. So the technology is good. I use it all the time. The question is more about the application of using the tech as an engine for workflows or creating financial plans. What options are out there for workflows, for plan design, for integration of other tech?
Yeah, it's a good question. So a lot of the technology that's out, if you think about it, right now, the first applications for financial plans and financial planning is is less about creating the plan and more about creating the text around the plan, explaining the plan, if you will. That's what the first companies are starting to do, that they're starting to see incorporate incorporate this sort of generative AI. I do think that it will ultimately be applied to some of the plan creation, right? Most plans are probabilistic in nature, and so is this technology. But there are some limitations here to be concerned about that we're gonna talk about. And one of those limitations is the way that these models do or don't understand facts. So so for ChatGPT, uh, and all of these things, most of these systems don't have any understanding what a fact is. So one of the key limitations here is, um, you have to realize that this is a probability engine underlying all of this, and so anything that relies on you delivering a fact, right, um, is suspect, and you have to treat it as such. So it'll make facts up out of thin air. Um, and the technical term for this is a hallucination, which is kind of goofy, but that's what they call it. Um, so if you ask for things like references with links um, or anything, those are likely to be wrong. They may not exist at all, and if they do, they often won't say what they're purported to say. It's just trying to fill in something probabilistically. So that's a real challenge for doing that sort of factual analysis that you'd base the plan on. So that's not great. But the explanatory text uh, isn't fact if you think about it. It's opinion, and that's much more likely to be very useful and get you much further along. Um, and it's easier to spot the issues. One of the other limitations of these systems is that most of the latest major training data sets are only as of about 2021. So it wasn't trained on anything after that. Um, Now, a lot of these problems are being worked on by incorporating ways to reference other systems um, via something called plugins within these systems. So what you're starting to see, and this is true for workflows, is you're starting to see connections between, say, ChatGPT and a way to do workflow, um, and linking a few things together where the generative or creative parts are done by the generative AI, but all the work is done by more specific technologies. And plugins are very new; they're still only available in essentially beta for ChatGPT, but they're coming. And these are the idea. Like, I'll give you a simple workflow. You ask the thing to create that dinner and that shopping list, and the next step should be, well, can you order that stuff and send it to my house? That's on its way. So those kinds of concrete real world workflows are starting to happen and be connected um, to these systems via these plugins. ChatGPT, if you're on the plus version, you can get access to many of these. So there's some limitations. So another issue that I think most of us are concerned about is security and privacy. So the risks here, generative AI is a learning system, and it learns from all the data that's given. Yeah, and and it generally remembers everything. So that means anything you prompt it with, um, it's going to remember. You can ask it not to, but you know, um, whether the system behaves as intended, as you intend, is an open question. Um, and it'll make inferences and connections across vast amount of snippets of data, just parts of data. So that means that any tidbit of personal or semi-personal information that you share with these models will likely be retained and combined with everything else it has ever learned, and it can put together all those clues and recreate private information, even if it's never explicitly given a full piece of private information. So personally identifiable information needs to be treated with a great deal of care, and you really need to not share PII with the system. Always placeholders, and we'll talk about exactly how you can do this. In addition to the PII issues, it does this with technical information, so it's it's also unfortunately making hacking more effective and more dangerous. Um, so so those are some of the issues that you've got with this kind of a system. Um, as a result, Blue Leaf, as a for instance, is building a manifesto for how we would use AI and all of the principles around which we protect data. And some of the principles are right here. So, and it's a lot more complicated than this. You'll see something published probably this year before we actually venture into this world. Um, but minimize any shared data, any data at all, because even if you don't think it could be connected to somebody personally, um, it's hard to be sure because of how smart these systems are at making disparate connections. So you share as little data as possible to get the results you need, and you never share personal information. It also means that anything you share with the system should be anonymized or in the aggregate rather than individual data points. um, so combined and summarized and obfuscated, those are important um, things to consider when you're using one of these systems. So if you want to write an email or a letter to a client, don't include the client's name as a for instance. Just include a placeholder, Bob Smith, and maybe you always use Bob Smith, and Bob Smith's not a client. You never heard of Bob Smith. Great. Then that letter can never be connected to anybody named Bob, any one of your clients. So those are the kinds of precautions that we'd recommend taking. They're simple, but they're very effective, and it'll prevent you straying into an area that, even if you don't share an account number. Let's say you share an obfuscated account number, but somehow the system finds other parts of that account number at some time 6 months down the road. It can put all that together. So those are the kinds of things you want to be aware of in terms of working with a learning system like these. Um, and with that, I'd love to turn it out over for any final questions that anyone has about AI and its use and limitations.
Our presentation was so comprehensive that nobody had any questions.
I have stunned you all into virtual silence. Well,
There was a
um,
Johnny Depp movie about 12 years ago that I recommend everybody take a look at. I can't remember the name of it right now. Oh, we got a few questions popping in.
awesome, and I've got them open, Justin. So, can I go inside your computer and read info? Super question. The answer is no, not typically, not unless you explicitly allow it and make a connection. So remember, most of this is accessed via your browser, and your browser has pretty strong limitations on what can be reached out and grabbed. And so unless you put in a plugin that says, okay, you can have access to my computer, or you explicitly upload, um, then you're unlikely to expose anything on your computer that technology doesn't allow for it. The next question is, what can we expect from Blue Leaf in the next 12 months using AI? There's a variety of things that we're considering. I'd say that the first two things that we're looking at are things around. Oh, before we go into what Blue Leaf is going to do, another good question. Will E&O insurance need to include uh, uh, AI tools? I think the cybersecurity insurance is going to cover AI usage, how do you use it, and the like. I think that's where you're going to see coverage and issues addressed around these things, because it is really part of cyber liability. So most of you probably have some cyber liability rider or explicit um, uh, cyber liability policy. Um, and I think that's very rapidly evolving. We got a few questions the last time we renewed our cyber liability. I expect we're going to get a lot more. People are going to probably expect that we have policies around or extensions in our privacy statements about AI usage. This is another area that Blue Leaf's thinking about. Like, how do we evolve our privacy statement to cover this? I mean, we've got some clear ideas, but basically, it's you never share PII or anything that can be connected to PII with these models. So back to the Blue Leaf question. So one of the first areas that we're looking at is something that we call chat UX. I wrote a piece in Advisor Perspectives about this recently, in HubSpot and Salesforce. You're starting to see a chat interface where you can ask natural language questions of data and just get um, responses. So you could say, "Tell me all of my show me all of my clients who've had a return of less than the S&P 500 in the last 12 months." And then it'll give you a list, it'll give you their returns, it'll just automatically format the data. So we're looking at ways to apply um, chat to the user experience where it can generate some of the user experience on the fly. That's going to take a while, as you might imagine. There's a lot of connective tissue to making that work, but that's something that generative AI can do. And if you think about it, that's meeting the promise that some of these voice interfaces have made for a long time, but really didn't deliver on. Right, something that's very natural and easy to work with as a human being. The other area I think you'll see where this is applied is in data enhancement and data improvement. So ways of identifying security. So third party data is notoriously awful. Sometimes it's very hard to identify what a security is. AI, both the classifier type and the generative type, can be used in combination to suggest what something might be, and then in combination with a human can get you a much clearer picture about that. And so there's a lot that can be done along those lines. Um, and oh, great question. So the AI search, so this chat UX, won't that
John,
expose
I don't think anybody else can see these questions. So could
yeah,
you
yeah, great.
say the question? It's
Yeah,
a great
fair,
one.
fair point. So this question is about if we do this search, this AI search through Blueleaf, won't that expose our client info? Super question. The answer is no, because you wouldn't use a public model at that point. You'd use a private model. So as a for instance, myself and friends have a full AI model on local machines, and that would be what you would train. So we would treat it exactly like the way that we treat your PII, the whole model. So it would be an entirely private model that would get trained in that case. So
And
yes,
PII,
Justin.
for those, I can't remember if you'd said this earlier, PII is personally identifiable information, account numbers, social security numbers, full names, addresses,
Emails.
emails, things like that. Anything that could identify you
Right.
specifically.
Right. Exactly. So the way you'd do that is you'd bring that in house so that you can treat it with the exact same rigor that you treat all of the other personally identifiable and financial information that we already protect today. So great, really great question. And then another question about report formatting using AI. Yes. So this is exactly where I was going with this idea of chat UX. So this is, can you change that color? Can you do this? Can you do that? So there's a lot of tools between the AI and the user experience and the results that we have to build. So that's a long build, but that's exactly where we would go with this sort of end user experience. And I think that is our last question. And
Any others before we go? Come on. I think that might be it. If you do have any others, we're not going anywhere. Oh, um,
great question. Will the annual fee increase with AI? No, we don't expect that that's going to increase the cost. Our actual hope is there are a variety of ways we think that if we're smart about the way that we implement it, that it can prevent fee increases, that we can hold the line, as we've done for many years. For most of you know this. So uh, our last price increase was 2014, and we would expect that we'd be trying to hold that line still and use the technology for that purpose. We know you all have tight budgets just like we do, and we want to use that to your benefit in that way.
Well, I really appreciate everybody coming out this afternoon. I know we intended
Absolutely.
about a half an hour. We went way over that, but we got a bunch of questions, so it was worth it. Hope you got something out of it. If you have questions, like I said earlier, we're not going anywhere. Fire them away, either to me directly, to John directly, or to our VIP team, and we'll make sure we get back to you as soon as possible. I really appreciate everyone's time this afternoon. It's awesome hanging out with you.